Hello everyone, my name is Roy. I'm glad to be here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Emerge Group. I'll let the fellow panelists introduce themselves first.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Jayf. I run RSG.
Hello, I'm Mark Balch. I'm with Oddin.gg, and we interact with the betting industry and a lot of the rights holders, tournament operators, and publishers.
Hello everyone, my name is William Nelson. I'm representing SCARZ from Japan. We are an esports team based in Kawasaki. This is our kind of first time appearance here at an ESI event, and so we're really happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone. So I think first and foremost, the topic of today is pretty interesting, I think, for most of the esports teams out here. And we're glad that we have the fellow panelists here to share their thoughts on this. First and foremost will be the title of the topic today, which is the esports teams and creative revenue diversification. So our first question for the fellow panelists will be, how can esports team effectively diversify their revenue stream while still maintaining their core focus on competitive gaming? And what are some successful examples that the fellow panelists have tried or have worked with the fellow esports team on? Jayf, from an esports team RSG who have tremendous success recently and growth, what are your thoughts recently on this?
I think I'm very flattered. Tremendous is a very big word, right? So, well, I think first and foremost, understanding the sources of revenue is basic for all esports team. If you look at the traditional form of marketing with sponsorship and endorsements, I think we've all kind of really tried to see how their level of engagement would look like with sponsors and what's the real ROI coming up from a team perspective. So I think not delving too much on the old school revenue model, what we've really tried to do in the last 2 years is to try and increase fan monetization. I think that's something that largely is very much untapped. If you look at the whole model of esports teams, not really very strong in the physical element, right? I think a lot of it, even on the digital front, a lot of the revenue streams and sources are being sort of like secured by platforms. So what can a team do? I think it's very much, for us, we've experimented on experience revenue, what we call experience revenue. I think it's something that has shown really good promise in terms of our level of our ability to bring a high level of engagement amongst our fans online and also bring it offline, what that would look like. So we've tried that, and that has helped us to a certain extent, I think. But the burning question here is, how can we really utilize the presence of Web3 technology and what that would look like to an esports team? We've seen many esports teams do their own NFT project. We did something of a meme ourselves, right? And I guess it's really up to that level of how an esports team would define ownership and utility and how you can string that together. I like to see of teams as airplanes because we have our own audience, right? We have our own fans. And we really just bring people to where we go, to following what we do. So how can we capture this in the form of, and how can we further expand on it using Web3 technology? I think that's the next frontier for ourselves. And we're still in the midst of trying to figure some stuff out. But yeah, that's us.
I would just like to expand on the actual problem itself. And I think it's actually shouldn't be up to teams by themselves to solve this problem. I think this is an ecosystem problem and it requires an ecosystem solution. And depending on the region, depending on the tournament and the games you're playing, there are so many different approaches to the way tournament winnings are distributed and how you interact with rights holders that it becomes quite complicated, and there's a lot of missing information or lack of structure in certain places where sometimes publishers have a system, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's up to tournament organizers to organize everything. Sometimes there's a body, sometimes there's not. So I think this is kind of feeding this problem that teams, let's say, can't traditionally make enough money just through tournaments alone. So they have to find additional revenues. So I think that's, let's say, the symptom of a problem. However, I do like some approaches. One of my favorites is 100 Thieves, and they actively brand themselves as a lifestyle brand. They're not just an esports team. They create an actual brand of clothing and things like this to expand the idea of what they are as a business. I quite like that. And there's quite a few different approaches regionally to reach out to physical consumer goods, like sandwich deals in I think TSM did this in California. So this kind of approach of reaching out to an audience and the deal being two ways. So it's not just a brand on your jersey and esports fans are buying the brand. You go out to the fans of the brand as well. And you put esports in the hands of people who don't know about it. They ask questions, a bit of education in the wider audience, especially in certain regions. So I think there's quite a lot that has to be done.
Yeah, and providing kind of a perspective from esports teams, when you're looking at the various revenue streams coming in, traditionally you have, like, if you're just only looking at the tournament revenues, you have very high highs and very low lows. But coming at it from the kind of a Japanese esports team, historically we have not had tournament revenue streams on a regional level. And that's based on traditional laws overlapping, like online gambling laws, limiting prize pools. So I hope to provide a really unique perspective here in how our team and how Japanese esports teams have navigated those really low tournament revenue winnings, and how SCARZ itself has we've also developed our own clothing and apparel brand. We've marketed to our fans. We've developed these very unique revenue streams to make sure that we are staying afloat and actually prospering among these other esports teams in the region as well. So I hope I can provide those perspectives and give you guys some insights into some of that there.
Thank you so much, everyone. Just sharing some of my own personal thoughts before we jump on to the next discussion point. I think my personal point of view really is to understand on the different type of cultural differences in terms of the region. I think Jayf will definitely be able to understand that as well, because in terms of the different countries, the level of fans support or the level of different type of fans engagements are relatively very different, especially I think Jayf, you yourself has experienced that as well with regards to Singapore, as well as your own Philippines fan base has insane amount of difference. And I think esports teams has to leverage on that and really be on the ground to understand on that portion of things. And I think it's similar to not just esports teams, but any type of businesses as well. What works in one country may not work in the different countries as well. And having that sort of understanding, not just based on online market research, but being on the ground and work with and understand the local community or the different partners or companies that are already there for ages. And I think this sort of informative approach will be much better before going in itself. And I think touching on to what most of you mentioned as well with regards to ecosystem support, and of course Jayf brought about a very interesting point, Web3 itself, and utilizing Web3, which relies a lot onto community and the entire ecosystem. So which brings me to the next discussion points. I think for Web3 itself, what are the different type of, I would say, revenue opportunities we are looking at, and how do we tread lightly into the Web3 space? Because I think most of us who are in esports knows that, traditional Web2 gaming fans are actually pretty, I would say, heavy towards that topic, or they have that sort of distaste towards that Web3 approach. So, guys, what are your thoughts on this?
Sure, I can provide some kind of insights here, because we have dabbled, like most esports teams, with some NFTs just to test the waters and see how our fan base reacts. Generally, we've had a pretty good reaction. One of the biggest teams that we have is called Identity 5. If you're not familiar, it's kind of a mobile game that's mostly, if you're familiar with like Dead by Daylight or the 5v1, or sorry, 4v1 kind of hunter kind of game there. But our team for Identity 5 in Japan has a massive fan base. And the reason for that is because we've kind of developed them almost like an idol group. Pretty much, and those fans are really into, the looks and the designs that we've given these players, and so utilizing that fan base and that kind of idol image with that, and then taking that into Web3, we've done a unique project called Ginza 6, where we had some of our fans come and put on these AR headsets and then get involved in this kind of metaverse reality where they could be in the video game area there. And what that has done is given our fans a unique kind of light step into Web3. You know, giving them an easy access and not hitting them with like, you know, all the jargon and everything for, you know, crypto and NFTs like that. So I think it's very important for fans to just, you know, not really realize that they're getting involved in Web3, but just, you know, giving that light step and then going deeper and deeper into those avenues there.
And I'd like to just say that I think the jury's still out on Web3, especially for esports. There's certain ideas which are being floated around, but one thing I think is an interesting and important part of Web3 is basically being truly global. And I think there's some issues at the moment with regards to addressing certain markets. When you have an international esports tournament, a local country sort of specific brand probably won't want to get involved because they can't address half of the market. So I think in a way, this helps solve this problem by introducing sort of ways to address the audience and this kind of growing community of people.
I think my perspective is a little bit different. First and foremost, I think that Web3 is a very big term, right? When Roy asked the question about revenue in Web3, I think those two words don't really come together. Yeah. So the way I see Web3 is the presence of a technology that allows a way better tracking in terms of assets, right? A digital asset. It also allows the ability to recognize assets, providing accessibility in that sense, right? So I think it's really that the technology itself is very neutral. I think a lot of people are bringing the sentiment that they have about crypto, right, cryptocurrency, into what the technology can embody. And I think that it's important to have the perspective that it's two really very different things first. If you look at the reason why a lot of gamers are not very receptive towards Web3 games, right? The reason for that is because the content coming out from these Web3 games are not mature yet. And if you look at the way that these games are being, are being pushed for publishing or marketed, right? A lot of it is using terms like play to earn, which, as we all know today, that there cannot be an infinite recurring extraction of value from an ecosystem, right? And that would not sustain value within that ecosystem. So we saw these problems long ago. Obviously, the first movers were able to go in and make some money and have a very good perspective on that. But I digress, right? So the way I see how an esports team should navigate this landscape comes down at its very core of its definition of what is the philosophy of the esports team. Obviously, you have some esports team experimenting with the ideology of allowing fan ownership and what that would look like, what that would mean. From that perspective, they would go as far as to say that my fans are given an ability to own a stake on my brand, a stake on my equity, a stake on even things like, or even having certain control functions being decentralized outwards towards all these different stakeholders. Now, from that perspective, then the question becomes really of what do you own in that team, right? And I guess that's the part that if you look at the way that most teams traditionally have done their fundraising, there is no way that any board would agree with any form of decentralization of its equity straight up, right? So it becomes a question of what kind of experience are you then really selling to your fans, and what are they buying, right? So then only when you have these parameters fixed, then you can look at it and say, all right, this is how that revenue is going to come about. So based on the previous example I've mentioned, there cannot be an infinite recurring withdrawal of value from any ecosystem. So therefore, similarly, from a team perspective, any design of any form of an NFT experience or any type of you could say NFT centering around this kind of fan engagement has to have an expiry. right? So we're looking at the expiry being something from a consumption perspective. With that consumption perspective, then you can defend the value of that product. Because if it doesn't expire, what would happen is you have like the Gary Vee model, where essentially everyone will be given an opportunity to talk to him, and then it's just free market, right? So we want to make sure that there is sufficient balance when it comes down to this particular type of product design. But as per my fellow panelists have also spoke about this subject, I think globalization, accessibility, these are very big, ideas everyone wants to do. The question here is, I think it's important that teams stay focused, right? It's not so much about having the access to perpetually unlimited powers through Web3, but at the same time, or even revenue, I think it's really about defining what that relationship between the team and the fan is going to look like, how it could be further enhanced with the technology, and then after that, designing products around that, using that philosophy, and to have that then design and dictate your ecosystem online. I think that's how I would have that perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jayf, for sharing your thoughts on this. And perhaps let me clarify, maybe I didn't put myself correctly across. I do not mean on just using Web3 as a form of revenue. I'm saying that most of the esports teams out there are actually looking at Web3 projects for some sort of sponsorship and advertising, because as we all know, actually most of the esports team probably here know that Web3 projects are one of the guys that have been the one that is paying the bigger amount of cash themselves. And maybe letting myself adding some thoughts into this, as we have worked with multiple Web3 projects, or I would say crypto projects as a whole. So we have been working with the likes of like Immutable and Bybit, which are huge into the Web3 gaming and esports space. So one of the key things I feel that right now, we work with a couple of esports teams on this as well, and I taken notice that some of the bigger teams out there, like we talk about 100 Thieves of Sword, right? Like you have mentioned earlier, I think they have taken a pretty, I would say, experimental approach on this. They have launched their own NFTs, and they are doing it as a free mean to test the market of their community themselves on how receptive are they towards the idea. And of course, with some of their creators, they are participating or launching their own scholarship in Philippines for the Arcade Arena event just recently. And I think this sort of approach are really careful and having a very good thought process and research into it, because one of the key things that I realize is that different markets have different receptiveness in terms of the Web3 portion of things, right? In terms of the different portion and different types of Web3 technology approach. Some of them are looking at the NFT approach, some of them are looking at the scholarship approach, some of them are looking at like what Jayf mentioned earlier, distributed technology approach in terms of the distribution of assets, co-owning of assets. And I think this is one of the key things, is to really understand what are the different receptiveness in terms of a community of the key markets that you're looking at towards the different portion of Web3 or different type of projects in Web3. As Web3, like what Jayf mentioned, is a huge I would say terms. There are too many type of projects that are evolving around Web3, from the likes of your DeFi, decentralized finance project, your Game5, your NFT, and so on and so forth. So moving on to the next question that I have. So I think this is one of the key concerns for most of the teams out there. We have seen the recent wave of esports teams winding down or scaling down due to a variety of different factors, such as the lack of investment interest from the VCs, escalating player wages, and the need of balanced financial sustainability and scalability itself. So what are some of the potential ways do you see, not just esports teams, right, but gaming companies in general, to navigate the challenges of managing their expenses while investing in alternative revenue?
Sure, I can go ahead and start. One of the unique things that SCARZ has done is we have kind of partnered with a music label to kind of develop this tournament we call Souls. And what that does is it combines, in the past we've done an Apex Legends tournament combined with a kind of unique music that would release a single with one of the popular artists from across the world. And basically in the middle of this Apex tournament, we had a halftime show, right? And what that did is it kind of brought this really two worlds together, and it really showed the potential there is for esports not just to remain in the esports world. Like, it can connect to other industries. And so by showing this, flexibility of esports and utilizing various different avenues, we can really, boost our value as a team itself. There's also our unique, like I mentioned before, we have our apparel brand. SCARZ is known, we have developed our brand as a kind of street fashion brand with kind of utilizing elements of like, just like a graffiti kind of style with it, combined with the traditional Japanese like calligraphy style as well. So we've implemented that branding into our apparel to make sure that we're keeping to our roots, and as we're growing, we're going to make sure that we stay with those roots to protect our core values as we go forward. And this also provides security for our potential sponsors or potential partners because they realize that we are a solid esports organization. We can provide them the return on their investment. We have done so in the past with these various events. And so it just really kind of increases that value as the company kind of grows there. But.
Yeah, and to expand, this is definitely not just a team problem. The profitability and business model of almost every company in esports is difficult and has been for a while. And I think that a lot of teams which have, let's say, failed, a lot of the time either didn't focus on something specific. You see, a lot of the biggest teams usually started with one specific team or one specific focus in order to build a sort of a hardcore audience or a brand around something that you can really work towards. If you try and scale too fast, then that's one way you just run out of money. And if you look even at other industries, like Amazon went through the dot-com bubble in 2001, and now it's worth unlimited amounts of money. So it's also an opportunity if you can survive any industry recession and be one of the ones who outlast the other brands. You can actually become sort of insulated from these effects in future by just being smart about balancing and having realistic expectations. It's not easy. You can't just go out, hire the best team, and then make loads of money. This is very difficult. And to have the right approach, balanced approach, and to not try and let it go to your head and then just have big parties and all this type of thing, which a lot of the players want to do. But even in other sports like NBA, there's been a lot of education of players burning the candle too fast, spending all their money all at once, and then once they get out, they have no money left. So I think this is part of an education sort of topic as well, that the players and the teams, need to keep it, on a balanced level as they continue to grow. And I'm sure that over enough time, esports will continue to get bigger and bigger throughout the world.
May I, if I could just add on to that, as you mentioned with like the responsibility for the players, because a lot of these players are quite young, and it's very important to either when they're young, they're probably 18, 19 years old, they're either deciding what to do with their future. They're deciding if I should follow the track and go to university, or if I should really dedicate my time to this. And what we're seeing in Japan is traditionally you want to kind of stay on track and you want to go to university, you want to get your job, and if you kind of step off of that path, it's almost kind of seen as a kind of a negative thing. But what a lot of esports teams are doing in Japan is working directly with parents, working directly with like local governments to give seminars on the benefits of esports, how accessible esports is. It's not just limited to able-bodied people, and just kind of growing the advocacy for esports and the growth of the system itself.
I think to answer Roy's question very directly, right? We have to look at the market trend where we were, and relatively where esports is today. So let's wind the clock back maybe about 3 years ago. I think there's actually a lot of venture interest in esports. And the reason why there's a lot of venture interest in esports is because tech is, slowing down, and they're looking for alternate spaces to invest in. But then again, if you look at the product life cycle of esports, right, and what esports really is, it's spectator sport. So if you look at spectator sport and the entire old school sports model, you will see that this was not built in 7 years. So that's one of the main reasons why I've rejected venture money with 7-year fund lives. It's just simply not possible. And I think people have realized that today, right? That VCs are not necessarily the best, you could say, engine to power esports. And that's why a lot of money is slowly leaving the ecosystem in that sense. But realistically, we are still very early on with where we are for esports and gaming. And I think that if anyone wants to invest in esports and gaming, what you're really looking at is not the kind of multiple return in terms of revenue or different kind of pillars, but what you're really looking at is the next generation's way of engaging and consuming entertainment, right? If you look at the young today, you will see that they're no longer out in the fields. We've said that for last ESI as well, right? They are all at home playing video games. They're playing Roblox. They're playing Minecraft, right? All these sandbox games, and that's how they're going to start interacting with their peers. So with that in mind, and if you look at the monetization of the average esports fan versus that of the average sports fan, you will see that we are only standing at 20 US cents. And traditional sports, $20 on average, global. So that's 100x right there, waiting for someone who can crack the question of how do we redistribute power between the publishers, because actually someone owns the game here, right? So how do we redistribute power? That's the first. Second, how do we look for new revenue sources so that we can increase their fan monetization? Now, obviously, from an esports team perspective, that level of fan monetization is very much restricted to just merchandise, right? I'm a fan of this team, I buy their apparel, that's it. That's why RSG, we're trying to innovate with experience revenue, we're trying to bring that to the phygital world, we're looking at how everything is going to string up. But how would this change in how the money flow affect an esports team? And about Roy's question on player salary, right? The truth is, we're all in a recession. Some of us may not feel it, but we are in one. And players, regardless whether there is a recession or not, they will always want more, right? So a lot of new players are coming to this space and saying, you know what, we're going to be investing a lot of money into the player salary, we're going to be signing the best top dog. And they can afford to do so because they are in a very different financial position versus someone who's, I'm in the business for 6 years now, right? So I think it's important that the market be given its time and ability to course correct itself. So this is all a question of balance. And the balance is exactly what we are going through, right? Some teams who overspend will die, right? And it's rightfully so. They took a lot of money, they bought buildings, all right? Good for you. You had the good time. Now it's time to pay the bill, right? Some teams may be a little bit more lean. They may have invested a lot lesser. They may not have signed the best players back then. But anyway, the player lifespan is very short, so it's not really a bad deal, right? I think RSG, we're very fortunate because we have always been very careful with where we spend and how we engage with our fans. We've always asked, I would say, important questions, even if we may not have the answer. And I think that's why we're still very fortunate to be alive here today. Our projection in terms of where we think the market is going to be landing eventually is really into what comes after this wave of games. It's not about this wave. I think this wave is very much, the meta has been figured out, right? You have your Battle Royale, you have your Mobile Legends, you have all these various games. That's all figured out. But the question is, what's next? Because games will evolve. Publishers will want to continuously innovate the next best product because esports is not sports. The game football has been no changes, right, for more than 100 years. The only change was the inclusion of VAR, which I think we all have come to love, right? Right, correct.
Thank you so much, everyone, for their sharing. So in the interest of time, I will not continue on with my own thoughts. I would just like to open to the floor for Q&A. Anyone have any question, please, Hi, guys. To the guy over there, yeah.
Hi, my name is Lutful Hardy. I have a question for all of you. For example, you mentioned, Jayf, that you said that we're at the early stages of esports. Do you think in the future that we'll start to follow up the traditional sports, like for example, a media marketing, media TV rights, like EPL, for example, is now sponsored to StarHub, to spread English Premier League. Do you think like we will start to use these kinds of like traditional sports direction? So yeah, and also lastly, another like revenue diversification. What do you like? For example, Fnatic uses the subscription membership fee. They have the Premier, the Core, and the Unlimited. So I'm not sure if that's a really great way to diversify your revenue. So yeah, I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts.
Yeah, just to kind of give you the answer to the first question there. It's definitely, I don't think it's going to be traditional sports. I think esports provides us with a unique opportunity to kind of more lean towards the entertainment industry, kind of access there, and then especially with like the creator economy and things like that, being able to utilize content creation and those kind of avenues so that young people can consume your content and the videos that you make and the really popular creators that you have on your team. I think is definitely one of the aspects that we can utilize.
I would also, when it comes to the traditional sports, this is something that even the publishers like Riot look to all the time. They sort of copied the NBA model for LCS franchising and redistribute revenues across the different teams. And this is very important in a lopsided branded league like NBA, where 3 teams make 100 times more than all the rest, and that would just make it completely imbalanced. So I'd say there's inspirations we can get from traditional sports, but it's so fundamentally different that I would agree that we need to kind of figure out our own method. The other complication is that the publishers own the sport, and this is not like traditional sport. You can go out and create, no one owns golf, and you just go out and create a different brand and have a completely different tournament, and no one can really stop you. So, whereas that's not really possible in a lot of publisher-controlled esports realms. So I think, speaking to, like Jayf said before, the redistribution of power across the different sections, I think this is very important. And I do think we spoke before, had a conversation about pay-per-view. And I must be one of the only esports fans that has paid to watch esports back in early GSL days. I actually paid a subscription to GOM TV. It is, I think, something that needs to be experimented on, because I do agree that esports does not monetize the audience enough, and the fans don't pay enough. But when with so many other options for entertainment, it's kind of hard to just charge money for it. So there needs to be some kind of creative mechanism that I don't think anyone has cracked yet. Publishers are trying, tournament organizers are trying, there are different ideas, but I don't think the answer is yet known.
What he said.
I'll touch a little bit on the subscription model that you are mentioning, because for us, we are doing a SCARZ ourselves as well, at Emerge Group, and SCARZ, obviously, subscription is one of the key. I feel that one of the key things you have to understand and probably deep dive into this, for subscription model, you have to really understand in terms of longevity and sustainability of it, because people are willing to subscribe to it, and I feel that most of the SaaS out there are doing the clickbait approach, right? Are giving a 3-month free, they will make everything super fluffy at the start. When people are giving that sort of subscription, will they continue subscribing is one of the key things. Like you mentioned, there's the 3 key things, which is what? 3 key packages, right? Which is what most of the SaaS are doing as well, which is normal, but really identifying what are you providing the SaaS, and is there some sort of sustainability to it? Not just the scalability, is that what are you providing as an esports teams to whoever is subscribing to you, and is it more of a long-term basis? What are they getting out of the subscription is the key, and how do you differentiate the tiering, right? Because most people will definitely go for a lower tier, which is normal, but then again, how do you incentivize them to go towards the higher tier, or at the best, the mid tier, which is, of course, the pricing dilemma, right? You wanted the people to always go for the mid tier, which is one of the reasons why you're pricing it at a 3 different tiering system. So yeah, I hope I answered that a little. Do we have enough time for one last question? Yep, let's go for one last question. Okay.
Hello again, Phil here. So I think one of the interesting things we've seen kind of that happened through COVID was a loss in quality of entertainment, right? We all of a sudden started seeing kind of cheaper broadcasts that didn't have the same level of immersive qualities that we grew to love before COVID. And I'm still seeing that happening. And now, you could have a streamer who's making $10,000, $20,000 a day, and their bed behind them is, disheveled and unmade. So from your guys' perspective, I think, I'd like to hear each panelist's perspective on this. Where does quality fit into revenue diversification? And is that something that you're starting to see brands kind of demand and saying, well, I know that this streamer has 1 million followers, but we don't want them representing our brand because we don't know what they're going to say on stream. We don't know what they're going to show up looking like. Is this something you guys are focusing on targeting? Is this something that we just kind of have to wait for? I guess if you guys could kind of give each of your perspectives, I'd be very interested in that.
I'd like to take that question first, if you don't mind. So for me, I have a PR agency as well. So I think media training for most of the, I would say, content creators is definitely important. And that's something that we have tried. However, this is something to take note, and it's a chicken and egg theory, right? For esports teams, most of them to hire a PR agency to media train every single content creators or esports athletes is going to cost a bomb. Unless, of course, internally they do have someone with PR experience to do media training. It's definitely something. But I feel that what can be, I would say, much easier, of course, is for them to do clear guidelines, right? What are the do's and don'ts for them to avoid, to be brand safe? Of course, most brand safety is something of their most immediate concern. And to answer your question regarding, most of them are getting crazy amount of revenue from the platforms itself. I think that is not just dependent on the content creators. I think most of the social media are to be blamed as well because it's a platform war, right? Everyone is trying to pay out more. I mean, Facebook did try that, Twitch, and so on and so forth. And in recent years, we have seen that this is not scalable, right? For them to continuously pay out more because at the end of the day, it's just a price war. Everybody is trying to pay out better to entice the content creators to jump over to their own platform. And most recently, there's a new platform as well, right? That's trying to, compete with Twitch, and they got really good streamers. But we have to take case studies from Mixer, right? Mixer tried that, and it's not a sustainable business model, in my personal opinion.
I don't think we have enough time to go into too much detail in terms of famous streamers versus esports, but I want to draw some lessons that I guess can be learned between. If you take someone who's absolutely huge on Twitch, the one thing that most of them do is elevate their audience in front of their peers. Is they bring that person's name on stream and talk about what that person wants to talk about. And that's why they make a lot of money, is because they give an audience, they basically elevate their audience. And esports doesn't do this. That's why no one subscribes to esports, really. Because you don't do anything with it. Your name doesn't come up on screen, they don't mention you. And I know from personal experience, this gives you an adrenaline rush, and 1 million people are seeing your name, and the streamer interacts with you. This is somehow missing in esports. And there are, again, rights holders who have tried to elevate the audience, but I think that's one way which you can tap into this idea that people want attention in modern worlds, particularly on social media and things like this. So enabling this and expanding on how to bring out the audience in person especially, I think that's a big opportunity.
Just quickly go from a team's perspective here. I know we don't have a lot of time, but it's a balance. It's a really big balance, especially if you want a really popular content creator, but sometimes a lot of those content creators are unhinged, to put it simply. And it's hard to, train them and be like, hey, this is PR training, right? When you do this, you gotta say this is your script, right? Viewers don't enjoy that. You watch sponsored, if you look at the viewer metrics for sponsored streams versus their regular streams, they're significantly less, right? And you have to communicate that to the brand and partnerships that there is a risk, especially, if the quality of the product is also not very good, there's a chance that the streamer or the content creator like, hey, this sucks, and then no one buys it, and then that just tanks the whole partnership, right? And then the partnership comes to us, and they're like, hey, why did they say that? And then we have to do this whole, kind of fixing the whole situation with it. So it's a very big balance, and we have to make sure that, the partnerships understand the risk, we understand the risk, and that we're communicating and educating our content creators to, to have some decorum, at least when they're online. So, yeah.
I'm just gonna summarize by saying that the content creators don't require the brand's budget or wallet, right? So they're just, for them it's about viewership numbers and they are doing what they're doing. I think it's the people who are sandwiched in between, like poor souls like myself, and that we probably want to try and get that brand money. But I think this is where the balance will come, because when you have sufficient trashy content out there, then people will start innovating what's the next type of quality content and what that would look like. So when you have creators who are no longer making as much from platforms, or even monetizing the fans enough, then they'll probably say things like, you know what, I'm not gonna have to, do my part now because I need to get paid, right? So what we're seeing in Southeast Asia is that a lot of platforms have stopped paying creators directly. Or rather, they have changed the way they pay creators from one where they are rewarding hours watched to the one where you are rewarding subscription, right? So there's a little bit more of that gifting model and mechanic. But that's the creator economy that I think will take a little bit more time to balance from a content quality perspective. But on the end of the brands, I think that they also need to know that the youth today are engaged in a very different way in comparison to what a brand would deem as proper, right? So there's that generational shift that I think everyone needs to be aware of. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you, my fellow panelists, for the insightful discussion. I understand that there are still some of you who have, burning questions. Please feel free to approach any one of us if you would like to know more. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope you have a great event.